Welcome to the Federalist Radio Hour. I'm Chris Bedford, senior editor here at the Federalist. I'm here with David Marcus on actually, I should ask you, what is your title?
New York Correspondent.
New York Correspondent.
I wanted to be Brooklyn Correspondent, but it was a little too cute.
Yeah, that's kind of, it's hipsters ruined Brooklyn. Sorry.
Yeah, not yet. North Brooklyn.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Smoking inside. I respect it. Welcome to the Federalist Radio Hour. I'm Chris Bedford here with David Marcus, both from the Federalist, and we just returned from scenic Pennsylvania, actually beautiful Pennsylvania, the eastern part of the state, northeastern to central eastern, where we went to two of the three swing counties that had gone for Donald Trump, that had traditionally gone blue, had gone blue since Ronald Reagan, to try and figure out how things were going to shake out. David, what were some of your takeaways? Well, first, let's go through some of the trip that we took, where we went and why we went there.
Yeah, so we start, well, you grabbed me in Harrisburg and we went up to where I had been for a rally recently, so I can talk a little bit about that later too. But we went up to Luzerne County, to Wilkes-Barre, and learned that is in fact how you pronounce it. So we were in Wilkes-Barre, trying to get the feel up there. And that was a county that Trump flipped rather dramatically. He won that county 17 points, I think, something like that. So we were there, and then we headed down to Northampton County, where we spent just a little bit of time in the very small town of Northampton, and then went to Bethlehem, which is a lovely little city. And Northampton, Trump also flipped in 2016, but more modestly. He won Northampton with just over 50% of the vote. So I think slightly different lifts for each campaigns in each of those counties. I think in Luzerne, a little harder for Trump to hold on to his massive lead, and maybe a little more opportunity for Biden to chip away at that 2016 victory. In Northampton, you have a county that has been steadily moving towards the GOP over the last several elections. So that's more of just a straight up regular dogfight. At least that was the sense that I got.
You know, I was looking through the electoral history of Luzerne today, Luzerne County, as we were putting the finishing touches on an awesome piece that'll be out in the Federalist Friday morning. On everything we found, a hefty piece with a lot of descriptors in it and a lot of interesting data we've been assembling with Dave's help and my own. I was going through all the different races in Luzerne, and Republicans have never really been, or rarely been, too far behind since Clinton's reelection. No one has won by double digits in Luzerne County since Ronald Reagan's reelection. Bill Clinton got close. I think he had 9 points in his reelection. But when it was John Kerry versus George W. Bush's reelect, for example, I mean, a year after the Iraq War had started, 3 years after 9/11, a plane had gone down in Pennsylvania, and this is a coal country. This is not exactly. It's a far cry from Seattle. John Kerry only beat Bush by 1 point. I thought that was a really interesting thing, and often it'll be within 3 or 4 points that the Democrat wins. Now, Bethlehem and some of these other places down south in Northampton County, that's a little different because it's more of a developed city. It's got some deep blue aspects. Granted, it is only the 7th largest city in Pennsylvania, which shows you it's not very big. But there are some deep blue pockets, and where the Democrats failed last time and the Republicans were able to eke out that 1 point victory was all outside of those population cities and centers in this rather expansive county, where places that had been just kind of blue became just kind of red, and places that were just kind of red became much darker red. That's where they won. But you were talking to the Republican chairwoman, David, who's been there for a while doing this and training poll workers, and she was one of the many witnesses into the changing face of the GOP as well as the Democratic Party.
Yeah, she had some interesting things to say. Basically, the very last question that I asked her was, who is she afraid Trump might lose? and who is she trying to bring in, who Trump didn't get last time, in order to make up for those potential losses. And she did not skip a beat as far as who he's going to lose. He said he's going to lose some suburban white women, and she felt very, very confident about that. Now, interestingly, her take on that was that this was because of COVID, that Trump's handling of COVID, just general sort of feeling about COVID. Uh, as I was writing the article and as I was thinking about it, I was a little dubious about that, just because I think we started to see the movement away from Trump of suburban white women prior to COVID. It played a role in the 2018 midterm. And when you go back to right after his election and the Women's March and all this stuff, white women really caught the brunt of progressive anger over the election of Donald Trump. They were really blamed. I think to some extent, the idea is that white men are just already irredeemable, so there was really no point in blaming them
I mean,
for
they're just the
voting.
worst thing that's ever happened to the
Right.
planet.
I mean, they're
There a single thing you could possibly attribute to a single accomplishment you could possibly attribute to white males? I don't think so.
slavery, but but beyond that, no. So yeah. So there was no there was no point in that. So really, the anger and the frustration got directed very much at white women, and I think in retrospect, maybe some of that worked. And sort of the idea was that they were beneficiaries of the patriarchy, and so there was a lot of pressure put on that demographic to move away from Trump, and it seems like some have now. The Lee Snowden, who's the county committee chair, may be right that COVID added to that. When I asked where he might make up for it, the biggest answer was rural voters, who they made an enormous pitch to get. They did a voter registration drive at like a demolition derby. I mean, they were really trying to get, especially rural voters who have not paid much attention before, new voters, just people who don't pay a lot of attention to politics, and then also minority voters, Latino voters in particular in that county was where she thought that the president could make up. So I mean, if those are an even swap, then Trump's okay and probably ends up with about the same result. If not, then who knows?
Yeah. Another thing, I saw the Suburban Women flight in Wisconsin, and I saw the Suburban Women flight in Michigan. I heard about it on the water. I heard about it in the suburbs. I heard about it. I mean, and in D.C., in conservative groups and some of the outside Trump groups, there is a push, I've heard, to say, oh, they'll come back. And there's also an instinct, but I had an instinct that they would come back when they started to see the riots. Now, when we were in Northampton and when we were down in Bethlehem, Philadelphia was rioting because a psychotic armed man armed with a knife had attacked police despite multiple warnings, or charged police and had been shot, which seems right. There was mass rioting and mass looting, and we're only about an hour and a half at that point from Philadelphia. It wasn't; those things didn't seem to register. And just we saw the riots in Kenosha, Paul Ryan's old district in Wisconsin, didn't seem to really be swaying suburban women. And so it's like they want safety and they want order, but I don't know. Maybe it's just a return to normalcy, an idea that putting Joe Biden in there will just make things better. But you've heard that men had a different reaction to the riots, and some people who might have been more on the fence were pushed away from the Democratic Party on the male voters over these kind of riots. Where did you pick that up?
That I also picked up from Snowden, but I've also heard it from a few other people. I mean, I think it's worth noting that I think it was mainly an assumption that people were making, that suburban white women were going to be afraid of these riots. Like,
I made that assumption.
I mean, I think everyone did. I think Trump clearly did. I haven't seen any real numbers that back it up. But look, with the exception of the ones in Kenosha, most of these have seemed sort of pretty far away from the suburban houses and stuff. I'm not sure that they feel that as dramatically. I think that with men voters, there's more of a sense of that because you've got more cops, you've got more people who are friends with cops, you've got more of a sense of protecting the home, maybe even. But yeah, it may be swaying. It may be swaying men. It does not at this point seem to be swaying suburban women.
One of the interesting things that we came across, we saw it in a bar that was already filled with smoke, where people were taking shots at 1:30 p.m. People who were off of work, because people have different weekends. I know different work, different
People.
jobs, different weekends. Folks, yeah, some of them are older, just retirees who just started drinking early. And getting lunch down at a bar up in Wilkes-Barre, and then we saw it also as a manager later on in Bethlehem. But this kind of feeling that well, one, these guys are hardworking, they're blue collar people, and they're mass attending Catholic voters. A lot of places, a lot of Catholics these days do not go to church. They say that they're Catholic, but they don't meet a single criteria for being Catholic. Like, couldn't be married, couldn't be buried. I mean, not a Catholic in good standing. These guys were. A lot of folks they took their faith seriously. It was wonderful to see. Wonderful to see it. And they took it seriously in regards to their vote. They also took a lot of people we spoke to seem to take being a Democrat seriously. It's not just, I mean, in my family, it's broken up. Brothers and sisters, aunts and uncles, brothers, parents, people vote differently. But in this region of Pennsylvania, it's a family tradition. It's a lineage thing. It's like your grandparents voted blue, you voted blue, your mother and father voted blue, your kids are going to vote blue. But there was also a feeling we saw at the woman working at the at the newsstand, that the Democratic Party doesn't represent them anymore. And I mean, Republicans have been saying that for years, saying that this party doesn't represent you. This is not your party. But now they feel it. And not only do they feel it, but they're not hearing it simply from Republicans. They're hearing it from their own party. They're hearing it from Democrats. They're saying, this isn't your party. If you are a Catholic, pro-life, union, working class Democrat, then you are behind the environmentalists, you're behind the abortionists, you're behind the transgender advocates, you're behind Black Lives Matter, you're behind everyone. You're just a poor white person. It seems like they're lost. And you identified this because you grew up in Philadelphia, or born there at least, and remember Bob Casey, the governor who went to bat against the Democratic establishment, who wasn't invited to the 1992 convention for Clinton because he refused to back down on abortion, who passed partial birth abortion bans and a number of other restrictions, almost all of which were upheld by the Supreme Court, who cared deeply about union rights, was pro-gun, and he was a Democrat, and he refused to join the GOP. And he won 2 terms in your state, but now, I mean, that's changed. Like, what was that? How was that? Because it was funny to watch you interact with people because you shared those sentiments. You understood them.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up as that Pennsylvania Catholic pro-life Democrat, and like you said, my grandparents were my parents. I mean, my parents weren't really pro-life exactly, but my mom's Catholic Democrat. Very firm believer in the Constitution, very firm believer in things like speech rights and religious freedom, and I think that's another. I think that's another on that list of things that scare church-going Catholics who are more conservative Democrats like I was. I mean, when you look at what the Democrats want to do in terms of religious liberty and the ways in which you are allowed to publicly express your faith, I think that's something that scares these people too. But if you recall, so I mean, I can't remember if Casey, I can't remember exactly when Casey lost, but Rick Santorum, I believe, was who replaced him, right? And Rick Santorum also hits all of these.
Well, yeah, Casey named a senator, an interim senator,
yeah,
and then campaigned for him despite fighting with him over abortion because he got his way, and then he was still beaten by Santorum.
Yeah, and that was the big deal in Pennsylvania. Now Arlen Specter was already a Republican senator in Pennsylvania, but Arlen Specter really was what a Republican was in Pennsylvania, right? A Republican in Pennsylvania was someone who went to the country club, somebody who had a lot of money. That was the traditional sort of Rockefeller Northeast Republican. Santorum broke with that a little bit, and my goodness, did Trump ever break with that, right? Now, what would be interesting for me, and I wish I had thought of this before, would be to go back and see how Ross Perot did it in these counties in 1992, especially in Luzerne, because that dramatic shift in Luzerne, I think, can only be explained by the fact that Donald Trump's candidacy broke with the orthodoxy of both parties, as far as things like trade, as far as things like manufacturing. I mean, we had a good 20, 25 years of both parties saying these jobs aren't coming back. You're going to have to learn some new thing. We'll have the technology industry. We'll have something else. And
learn to code.
Yeah, I learned to code before there was learn to code. And Trump said, no, I'll bring the jobs back. And they said, I'll give you a chance to do that. Right now, listen, if COVID hadn't hit and unemployment hadn't, gone back to where it was, and obviously it's coming back, I feel like Luzerne's more of a slam dunk because I think Trump delivered on those promises of bringing the jobs back. But yeah, that more than anything else, I think is where Trump found a level of appeal for these blue collar workers who had basically been told to pound sand for the better part of my lifetime.
Yeah, I just pulled it up, and exactly to your point. I mean, that's the re-election year, or that's the election of So in Northampton here, that year, Bill Clinton got 43% of the vote. George Bush got 35% of the vote, and Ross Perot got almost 21% of the vote.
Mm-hmm.
And it's similar in Luzerne. It's not quite as much, but 44 to 38 to 16. So
yeah.
Absolute devastation to the Republican ticket, and places that not always quite that far away, because those are the things that people care about. And Donald Trump is someone who it's surprising, and it was not something I expected to see at all when I first met him on the campaign trail in 2015 and 2016. But despite his Brioni suits and his red ties, he not only fits in with, but gets along with working class guys at an unbelievable level. Where you'd see other candidates, who are on the campaign trail doing dress up, literally changing their outfits. Were they wearing cufflinks, or were they wearing a tie? Were they in a suit, or were they in a vest? Were they rolling up their sleeves or not? They try to pretend it was casual, but if you follow these guys around at different campaign stuff, and you notice that the only thing that changes about it is not the speech, it's how they're dressed, you recognize that they're just wearing different costumes to try and make people feel comfortable. Didn't matter if Trump was talking to a bunch of guys with Vietnam hats and Vietnam jackets and Vietnam shirts who were there on their motorcycles or would come in with their family. He was wearing that exact same thing, and he would hang out and he would talk, and they loved him because he wasn't a costume. He was who he was.
Look, he was coming from a world where he had that kind of exposure, right? I mean, think about the difference between a Donald Trump and a Michael Bloomberg, right? They're both incredibly successful businessmen. They're both billionaires, whatever it is. Bloomberg's in finance.
One's a little richer, I think.
Yeah, well, yeah, but I mean, both New York guys, but very different industries, right? In finance, you have a very fancy apartment building, and you tip your staff by giving the head of management some envelopes, right? And that's kind of like how you deal with the working class guys. When you're a builder, you're on site, right? You're there. You're talking to the guys who are managing that workplace. You're talking to the guys who are building it. In his when he first started, you were talking to some shady guys sometimes. I mean, when he first started in that industry in New York City, you didn't build anything in New York City without involving yourself with some people who went to a very different kind of college than Bloomberg or Trump did, right?
Didn't go to Wharton. Are you suggesting that the waste disposal and cement delivery businesses are not run by Boy Scouts?
Perfectly legitimate businesses forever and ever. But no, but you take my point, right?
We do not mean to besmirch anyone in the cement industry. By the way, Northampton was the cement capital for a long time until 1982 when the plant shut down.
Well, there you go. So, I mean, I do think that some of his facility with dealing with people who work with their hands just comes from knowing more people who work with their hands than most politicians who reach that level really ever have to deal with. And you're right. I mean, he really can do it. It's remarkable. I mean, you saw a little touch of that. You know who else could do that? Back in the primary, when you saw Rubio, at you know, in like the behind the restaurant of hotels or stuff like that, right? And you could see that he grew up knowing these people. He wasn't putting on any airs when he went back there and was talking to these people. These were people like the people he knew.
He's
So I do,
actually a person who I'd heard was I heard from people who were working in the makeup and hair part for television. So they were they were the folks who no one sees you when you interact with them. There's no cameras there. You're getting ready for the cameras. You're behind a
yeah,
curtain. It's pretty private. And that was my first inkling that something was up, and I hadn't been told everything everything that I thought wasn't necessarily true. Because I said, "Who do you like the most? Like, who's been the nicest and coolest?" And everyone just said Donald Trump. And
yeah.
then I said, "All right, who was the biggest asshole?" And then one woman just blurts out Marco Rubio, and the other one said, "Shh," and everyone just kind of got quiet. And you're like, "Was a jerk." And, I'd heard that actually repeatedly, but I had kind of
He
brushed it
might
off
just
because he's
not like
Mr. Nice Guy.
he might just not like having makeup put on him. But I thought,
I mean,
but
Donald Trump
again, like
likes it more probably. He's
yeah,
a
I mean,
television guy.
he honestly might have just felt uncomfortable. I mean, I didn't feel terribly comfortable the first few times that happened to me. But yeah, look,
You're not
Trump.
wearing makeup right now?
I'm not wearing makeup. I didn't even shave. I'm lucky I got out of bed. Yeah, Trump's ability to appeal to those voters, I think, surprised people in the primary. I think by the time he won the nomination, I think we knew that he had that ability. But harkening back to what I said before, he's got to find a way this time to expand that out to Black and Latino voters as well. It looks like he's made inroads with Latino voters. A little less clear where he stands on the Black vote, but
Well, he's gotten right now, the New York Times is reporting this week, 25% in Philadelphia City. Now, he's not doing well in the Philadelphia suburbs,
yeah,
those infamous suburban white women. But Philadelphia City, like, granted, there are a lot of old Italians in Philadelphia, but that's also going to be the Black vote, at least amongst men.
yeah,
We'll see. And there are some exit polls that said that DeSantis down in Florida was pushed over by the Black woman vote. There's only a few exit polls that say that, so it's been poo-pooed by a lot of liberals in the media. Poo-pooed it and said there's no credence at all to this because it doesn't fit with the fact that all Black women owe all allegiance to the Democratic Party at all times. Now, I don't know if we can take that one exit poll, but it's certainly not worth poo-pooing and ignoring. And I would not at all be surprised. I mean, Univision, I think, came out just this week that shows Donald Trump hitting 50% with Hispanic voters. And if you go to non-Cuban Hispanics, it's high, but it's not 50%. And if you go to Cuban Hispanics, it's well over 50%.
yeah,
Because it turns out that like you can pay homage to socialism, and the kids of the grandparents won't care. Hardcore conservatives who fled Cuba will still care, but their kids will probably start to fade on that.
mhm,
But once you start attacking people in the streets and condoning violence and mob viciousness and political attacks by communist organizations and anarchist organizations like Antifa, the kids and grandkids say, Grandpa told us stories about this, and then it starts to kind of click like that.
yeah.
No, wait. This is
Well,
what Grandpa was talking about.
well, and listen, it's very important going forward too. I think regardless of whether Trump wins or loses, all that you hear from the left is, well, the GOP is a dying party. All it has is like angry white men. And that demographic is shrinking, and so the Democrats
It
will
also
hold.
has angry Black men and angry Hispanic men,
Well,
and
that's
a
what I
lot of
mean,
women
right?
as well.
As long
We're pretty
as long
heated.
as we could have angry Black men and angry Hispanic men, potentially angry Asian men, right? There's a broader collection of angry men out there who GOP
It's a rainbow.
can tap, right, a rainbow of angry men that the GOP can tap into. So this idea that if Trump were to lose, we all have to listen to like the Never Trumpers and go back to Bush Republicanism. It doesn't even make demographic sense because Trump's populism is doing better with those minority groups than the old-fashioned establishment GOP was. So that's a really undersold story, and I think we know why. I mean, I
And there's
think
going to be a disaster if they do that. We heard about because I mean, there's a lot of politicians who we spoke to, just state politicians and some of the other Rust Belt states, who were saying that they are really worried about what happens to the Republican Party after Donald Trump is gone. Now, when the GOP chairwoman we were talking to down in Northampton County was registering voters at the demolition derby, they wanted to register for the Donald Trump party. A lot of them, they weren't there to register for the party of Paul Ryan, the party of Lindsey Graham, the party of Mitch McConnell. They were there. I know Paul Ryan's gone, but they just weren't there for that party. Marco Rubio, they're there for the Donald Trump party.
yeah.
So if they try to pull some BS and put like a Nikki Haley in charge of the ticket or something next time, and just I think it's going to be a disaster because they will lose the blue collar voters who they've gained. Almost certainly. There's no party affiliation loyalty here yet. It's to Donald Trump and to these policies. They'll lose them, and they will not gain back the suburban women nearly as quickly as they would need to. I mean, if they would try to go back to that old formula, I tell you what, they'd lose me. I wouldn't vote for them. I'm a registered Democrat, but I would not vote for them if they went back. And I don't think I think these suburban women would be slow to come back too. They're probably gonna try and do it though, if in the future at some point, regardless of if Trump wins or loses this round.
I mean, I would imagine so, but look, I think that when you think about who are the people who are up and coming now in the GOP, they're not really in the mold of that old Bush establishment. I mean, even Ted Cruz really isn't. Hawley certainly isn't.
Hawley stands out. Hawley, Tucker Carlson.
Yeah, you know, no, but it is that it is that wing, right? I mean, that there was that ridiculous tweet that David Frum just put up where he forgot that half of the people who write for the Federalist are women.
Basically, the entire leadership team.
Right.
I mean,
you know what I mean? Like,
what's that like? I guess Molly Hemingway. I guess she's kind of behind the scenes, so you wouldn't know about her.
yeah, right. We should
Joy Pullman, our executive editor. That's not a very big title.
Sure. But even when you look at the list of who he said, and they weren't all, Tucker Carlson was on that list, Glenn Greenwald, Matt Taibbi, right? And he really was identifying this new kind of conservatism that Sohrab Ahmari has called it woke conservatism. I mean, I think there's different ways to look at it, but I think the simplest way to explain it is that it is no longer the apologetic Republican Party of, we'll accept our losses in the culture war as long as,
corporate tax breaks.
Yeah. That can't, I mean, it's almost ridiculous to talk about. It's not coming back. So the question will be like, is there some kind of a fusion thing in the future, or is it completely dominated by this woke conservatism or whatever?
There was no money for the woke conservatism, so they better figure that out. Because all the money, the Kochs, the libertarian billionaires, the Chamber of Commerce.
Yeah.
I mean, if you want to go after China, you're going to lose Sheldon Adelson, as he's not backing anyone this time because he makes more money in China. I mean, he makes more money in China than he does in Las Vegas, and he's going to pick his wallet over the most pro-Jerusalem president they've had, which is his major issue. But at the end of the day, leaving Pennsylvania, what were your takeaways? What do you think's going to happen? I know this is a guess. We went to two swing counties. We were only there for 2 days, and due to COVID, it was a little limited who we were able to talk to, but we talked to about 20, 25, 30 people, I would say, over those 2 days, casually and then more formally. What sense did you get from the history, from the polls, from the numbers, and from what you saw?
I think it's going to be hard for him to repeat the massacre of Luzerne. I think he's going to win Luzerne. I don't know that he can win it by quite that much again. I think Northampton is a coin flip county and has been, for a while now. The big takeaway, the two things that we talked about as we were coming back were, one, what we already discussed about needing to find a substitute for the suburban white women that he won. in 2016. But the other thing that I think we both noticed was that the Democrats are very, very organized. Now, as you've noted, that for them right now, that can't mean knocking on doors or rallies or whatever, but it doesn't have to, especially in the age of like mail-in voting and stuff like that. There are operations to target voters. I'll tell you an anecdote that I didn't know until yesterday. I just went on Facebook and shared some of my thoughts about having been in PA and about how I did think the Democrats were more organized. And I have a friend who lives in Portland, Oregon, who hasn't lived in Pennsylvania, I think he said in 6 years. And he's getting at least once a week text messages about getting out to vote for Biden. So, I mean, they are using their lists. They're doing everything they can to get these votes out. As we noticed, in Northampton, the Republican committee seemed pretty strong. In Luzerne, it did not. And so if Democrats have the edge in organization, clearly Republicans, or Donald Trump anyway, have the advantage in enthusiasm. And that's, I mean, I don't know. Both of those things are important. I don't know which is more important.
I mean, I was counseled by a friend of mine who's been doing this for a little while. He was the communications director for Barry Goldwater's presidential campaign in 1964. So it's not his first rodeo, and it was called by the New York Times in like the 80s, the voice of the silent majority. He said that he remembers being in San Francisco with Barry Goldwater and seeing a spontaneously put together parade of like 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 people in San Francisco parading for Barry Goldwater. And this young girl was in the campaign, said, "Oh my gosh, look at this. We're going to win." And he's just sitting there thinking, no, we're going to get destroyed. I mean, they had a lot going against them. President Kennedy had been killed, and America didn't want 3 presidents in a single year. But you have to be somewhat careful to. He told me to temper my understanding of enthusiasm gap for raw numbers. But I tell you, I'm still bullish, and I came away feeling the exact same way you did, which is that if you look at the video of the Joe Biden rally in Luzerne just before he got there, it looks like from the outside it was a Trump rally. For as far as you could see, there were Trump flags everywhere.
And what about this? You know, I think I don't hold me to this 100%. But when I went out to Nevada, I wasn't able to get there. But one of the things that I saw that I might have been able to go to was one of those boat rallies. I think it was at Lake Mead.
Boat parades are the coolest thing. If 2020's got one awesome thing, it is boat
rallies. Well, and as far as I could tell, at least through the portal that I got to in terms of like the organizers and stuff, that was not the Trump campaign. Now, maybe some of them are, but I think
campaign doesn't do that. That's local stuff. That's boat clubs.
I think these are just people who get together and they like boats and they like Trump and they're like, let's do a thing. So that's what I mean about how like an organic volunteers who show that kind of enthusiasm can make up for an organization gap. But I think your point is very well taken that, professional organizers and professional politicians and political advisors are professionals for a reason. So Trump was able to strike that kind of magic 4 years ago. It would be remarkable to do it twice.
And I tell you what, we're in the final stretch, of the election. Who knows how long it lasts, but it's looking interesting right now, I'll tell you. And tune in for our piece. I'll be live on the Federalist on Friday morning. I'm Chris Bedford, senior editor here with David Marcus, our New York correspondent. Until next time, be lovers of freedom and anxious for the fray.